Insanity by Rachel Schneider. Insanity. Insanity or madness is a state of being mentally ill by possessing behaviors that are characterized by abnormal mental or behavioral patterns. Historical views and treatments. Primitive cultures in general would turn to witch doctors or shamans who would apply magic, herbal mixtures, or folk medicine in order to rid the body of evil spirits or bizarre behaviors. More specifically, the ancient Greeks believed that affliction of the mind did not differ from diseases of the body. They also saw that mental and physical illness as an imbalance with bodily humors. Bodily humors is a system of medicine that details the makeup of the human body. However, there was also great sense of stigma, shame, and humiliation attached to mental illness. Mental illness was believed to be a sign of guilt or punishment for both insignificant and major crimes. The mentally ill were often imprisoned or even put to death. The Ancient Romans. The ancient Romans made further contributions to psychiatry. Similar to the Greeks, they believed that strong emotions could lead to physical aches or disease. They supported humane treatment of the mentally ill. Different from the Greeks, the Romans believed that mental disorders were caused by excessive tightening of the pores of the brain, as opposed to being caused by some mysterious force. They also supported that the mentally ill be mitigated from responsibility for criminal acts. Similar to today, the defendant would also have to be proved mentally ill or unstable. The Middle Ages and forward. The Middle Ages was the end of progressive ideas of the Greeks and Romans. The French and British introduced humane treatment for the clinically insane. One way of treatment was involving insane asylums. Although this was an improvement from shunning or executing the mentally ill, requirements in order to be placed in an insane asylum were very loose. Thus, patients with less severe diseases such as speech disorder, speech impediments, epilepsy, and depression were eligible to be placed in the asylum. More about the asylums. Europe's oldest asylum is the Bethlehem Royal Hospital of London and began admitting the mentally ill in 1403. The first American asylum was built in Williamsburg, Virginia, in 1773. Before the 19th century, hospitals were used to isolate the mentally ill or the socially excluded from society rather than cure them or maintain their health. Some horrifying pictures from this era portrayed patients bound with ropes or chains, often to bed or walls, or restrained in straitjackets. Now let's get into some modern research and knowledge about mental illness. There are two general levels of mental illness. Neurosis. Neurosis is the first level of mental illness. It is a class of relatively mild or functional mental disorders. This class of disorders is also known as psychoneurosis or neurotic disorder. Symptoms. Symptoms of neurotic disorder include anxiety, depression, or distress that are out of proportion to the circumstances of one's life. Medical News Today reports on June 14, 2012 that, quote, those who score highly on neuroticism tend to be particularly sensitive to environment stress and respond poorly to it, end quote. Neurotic disorders may impair a person's functioning but are not severe enough to incapacitate a person. For example, this means that patients of neurosis do not suffer from delusions, hallucinations, or a loss of sense of reality as seen in psychotic patients. So behavior is not outside socially acceptable norms. A specific type of neurotic mental disorder is obsessive compulsion disorder, or commonly known as OCD. OCD is also a form of anxiety disorder. It is characterized by uncontrollable or unwanted thoughts and repetitive ritualized behaviors one feels compelled to perform. Even though these thoughts, feelings, or behaviors may be recognized as irrational, patients of OCD are unable to resist them. Symptoms. The first and foremost symptom of OCD is obsession. This is defined as involuntary or uncontrollable thoughts, images, or impulses that recur or persist despite efforts to ignore or comfort them. These obsessive thoughts are often disturbing or distracting. Compulsion. Another symptom of OCD is compulsion. Compulsions are repeatedly performed behaviors or rituals. These rituals are performed in an attempt to seek relief from associated obsessions or obsession-related anxiety. So, for example, an obsession with cleanliness or fear of contamination develops the compulsion to excessively wash one's hands. As you can see, this repeated task of washing one's hands is performed in order to mitigate or reduce the anxiety that stems from this obsession. The third symptom is cognitive defects. These defects are mild but wide-ranging. OCD can impair one's spatial memory, which is responsible for recording information about one's environment. So, for example, spatial memory is required in order to navigate around a familiar city or town. It can also impair verbal memory, which is the memory of words or other abstractions from language, or verbal fluency, which is the rate at which someone can produce words. Other types of neurosis include post-traumatic stress disorder and pyromania. Post-traumatic stress disorder is classified under anxiety disorders, where persistent mental and emotional stress occurs after one has experienced psychological shock or extreme emotional trauma. Pyromania, although unusual, is an obsessive desire to set fire to things. This disorder usually develops as a way to cope with traumatic or stressful events. Neurosis also includes a wide variety of phobias, anxiety, impulse control, panic, and mild depression disorders. Psychosis. Psychosis is a class of much more severe mental disorders and diseases, usually in which contact with reality is lost. Symptoms. Symptoms of psychosis include hallucination, delusion, and catatonia. Hallucination and delusion will be further explained later in the presentation. Catatonia is a profoundly agitated state. It impairs one's experience of reality. There are two primary manifestations of catatonic behavior. Number 1, when a person does not move or interact with the world in any way while awake. 2, excessive or unnecessary motor behavior as well as extensive mental preoccupation in order to prevent them from making any connection or interaction with the outside world. So an example of this is someone walking very fast in circles. This excessive motor behavior preoccupies their mind so they don't have to come intact or experience reality. Causes. Causes of psychotic disorders include medical illness or conditions, sleep deprivation, severe stress or trauma, and genetic predisposition. Statistics. Psychosis affects every 3 in 100 people. It usually occurs in late adolescence to adulthood, around the ages 15 to 30. A specific type of psychosis includes schizophrenia. Schizophrenia impairs one's ability to distinguish real from unreal, manage emotions, and relate to others or establish relationships. People with this disorder have an altered perception of reality or have a significant loss of contact with reality. Symptoms. The first symptom of schizophrenia is hallucination. The simple definition of hallucination is perceiving something that is not real. This may occur in any of the 5 senses and take almost any form. Hallucinations can include simple sensations such as light, colors, taste, and smells, to much more dramatic and severe experiences such as seeing or interacting with fully formed animals or people, hearing voices, or having complex and palpable sensations. The second symptom is delusion. A delusion is a false belief that a person supports very strongly without having any real confirmation or evidence. It is very difficult to change this belief even when the person is presented with evidence to the contrary. Some examples of common delusions are persecutory, where a person believes that others are out to harm them, or grandiose, which is when a person believes that they possess special powers or skills. Helpguide.org reports that, quote, with such a blurred line between imaginary and real, schizophrenia makes it very difficult and even frightening to negotiate in activities of daily life. In response, people with schizophrenia may withdraw from the outside world or act out in confusion and fear." End quote. Other information regarding schizophrenia includes most cases of this disorder occur in late adolescence or early adulthood. However, it can appear in middle age or even later. In rare cases, it can appear in children or even early adolescence, although these symptoms are slightly different. In general, the earlier it appears, the more severe the disease is. Lastly, this disorder tends to be more severe in men than in women. Other types of psychotic disorder include bipolar disorder and postpartum depression. Bipolar disorder is marked by alternating periods of elation and depression. Postpartum depression is a complex mix of physical, emotional, and behavioral changes that can occur in women after giving birth. Thank you for listening to the Insanity presentation.